We started our studies in this section with this very profound summary that our brother Thomas gave us, which really encapsulates the whole plan and purpose of God. But we want to focus this morning upon the fact that as part of God building a divine family, there are two stages to it. There are the first fruits under God, which are the saints who are glorified at the return of Christ. And then there is at the end of the 1,000 years, the total divine family of the immortals who remain. And as Brother Thomas says, every one of them shall be spirit because born of spirit. And it's exploring that concept of being born of the Spirit physically that we wanted to look at in our study today. Now, you all know this quotation very well because you've probably had it put in front of you many, many times over the years, but we need just to always think about the fact that we need a mental sight. We need to have a vision. We need to have ourselves in the picture when it comes to understanding immortality. And as it says there, we need to contemplate it with pleasure, that there is a day coming when we shall be free from the shackles of this mortality and the fear of death, which is always lurking with us, that we're going to have this vision of being born of spirit and living eternally and infinitely with our God. And of course, as we know, without that, of course, we tend to lose our grip on the things that matter. When you look at the things that Christ promised in the 7 letters in the Apocalypse, the story there is telling us of what we are going to be and what we're going to do. We'll have access to the tree of life. So the fact that we will be able to have that life that has always been promised. A crown of life, which of course talks about a reward. The crown, of course, was the Stephanos, the wreath given to the victor at the Olympic Games, a crown of life that never fades away. You know, their olive leaf thing that they got in a little while was just a lot of brown, dry leaves, and it eventually crumbled to nothing. We're going to have a crown of life, a commendation. And we haven't got time to talk in this series yet about the different roles we might portray in the kingdom, but you can visualise the different roles the saints will have and the different rewards they will have as part of their acknowledgement from God of the way that they live their lives. So a crown of life that never fades away. Eating the hidden manna, another way of talking about eternal life. Receiving the white stone, we talked about last night, with that little name upon it, which is that unique connection between you and Christ, which it's going to be a very special relationship when we understand why Christ has given us that name. Power over the nations. So here we now come to our role, don't we? Confess before the Father and the angels. It's again that acknowledgement that we are in that company with the angels. The new name given and installed as permanent placed pillars in God's house. And then, of course, to sit with Christ in his throne. So a very eloquent summary of what the future holds for us. Now, when we go to the scriptures about what God intends to do in the future, we have in Psalm 149 a couple of stages of the process. It says, Yahweh takes pleasure in his people. He will beautify the meek with salvation. I want you to just ponder that thought for a moment. He will beautify the meek with salvation. Now, some of us need a little more beautifying than others, but some of us might even get a hair back. But he will beautify the meek with salvation. Just think about that. So what that means, God is going to take away the blemishes, take away the disabilities, take away the things where decrepitude has set in. You know, where you've got false teeth and false joints and glasses and all of those things. It'll be a thing of the past. So he's going to beautify the meek with salvation. And then it goes on to talk about the joy of getting that eternal life. So we're joyful, we sing aloud, the high praises of God in our mouth. So there's going to be a joy associated with that time. And then there is the work that we have to do. And this is the first stage of the work, which is to change the world dramatically by force and to subdue the nations and to get rid of the wicked. And that's our honour to participate in that. It's why we must love righteousness and hate the iniquity that we see out there and want to take it away and remove it from the face of the earth. It's part of the honour of saints. And then we move on to the work of recreating the world and refurbishing the minds of the people of the world. And that's another stage which we'll talk about, God willing, tomorrow. But I want to talk particularly about the immortal experience, the beautifying of the meek with salvation. Where do we look to get a vision? Well, we go to the Lord Jesus Christ first. Paul says this, he shall change the body of our humiliation, as it should be rendered. He shall change the body of our humiliation to be fashioned like unto his glorious body. So the obvious first place to go is the risen Christ, isn't it? John says the same thing. When he shall appear, we shall be like him in character, and we're going to share the same existence of being a glorified human body, an immortal human body, as was Christ. So obviously Christ is the first example. But how much do we know about the risen Christ? Well, he ate food with his disciples. We're going to look at more of that later on. But one of the things that immortal, spirit-filled bodies can do is to absorb food and to have the pleasure of eating, have the fellowship of eating. Some of us might think that's a great idea. But, that's one of the things we will still enjoy, is to be able to eat food with his disciples. But then we find about the risen Christ that quite often he appeared suddenly inside rooms that when they thought the door was locked, and he's actually there in the room with them, so he could appear or disappear at will. He appeared differently, he appeared in another form, it says in Mark. So he was not recognised on the road to Emmaus. He was not recognised until his hand came out offering the bread and they saw the wounds. It was in the offering and the passing of the bread that they suddenly recognised him. But you see, they didn't see him up to that point as being Jesus. He could go swiftly from place to place. He went from the tomb to the road to Emmaus, just like that. He has wounds in his hands and his side, so there were left on his body, even immortalised, the evidence of his sacrifice to convince people like Thomas and to convince the Jews when they see the wounds in his hands. So there's a purpose in those scars being preserved. And he could go to the presence of the Father and sit at God's right hand in that great throne of immortal glory, which no human could abide in. He can exist in that with the angels around the throne of God. And that's about all we know about the risen Christ. Now we're going to look at all of those same aspects, but we're going to do it through the medium of the angels. To know more about divine nature, we need to go to the other avenue that God has given us, and that is his glorious angels. And in some ways, because they are the servants of God, because they are the ones that God sends forth into the world to perform his will, they have a great lot of things to teach us about our future existence, our physical existence, our abilities, and the work that we have to do. Now, here's a quote from Luke chapter 20. Now, this came out of an argument with the Sadducees. But I want you to notice the power in this for us. But those which shall be accounted worthy, do not read that as saying who are good enough. They are accounted worthy by the grace and mercy of God to obtain that age, the future age, and the resurrection from the dead, neither married nor given in marriage. So in immortal nature, there is no need for procreation. And there's no need for the institution of marriage for those who are made immortal. Neither can they die anymore. So they are ever-living creatures because they share the infinity of God. And they are equal unto the angels, both in status and in physical existence. They're the children of God, being the children of the resurrection. So here is the first fruits. Here are the first fruits being joined unto the angels as one family. And Ephesians says that God intends to join together in one, his whole family in heaven and earth. And all the sons of God that stand around his throne will be happily united as one family with the saints, the first fruits, at the beginning of the kingdom. And so we are being made equal unto the angels physically and also in the roles and the way we perform those roles as the angels do. And so we have the promise of divine nature, partakers, fellowshippers of the divine nature, having escaped the corruption that's in the world through lust. And that's what is set before us in the great and precious promises and the hope of Israel. In Psalm 104 it says, "Bless Yahweh, who maketh his angels spirits." So he took individuals that were very likely mortal like us, very likely going through a life of knowing good and evil, and have been made perfect by the Father's good grace. And he made them into spirits, and his servants, his ministers, his servants, a flaming fire. And that's what God's done to their physical existence. And our vision is to be equal unto the angels. And this is how we can understand immortality, because we have far more detail about angelic existence than we do about the risen Christ. So we take both of them on board, but we're going to see the same things evidenced in the angels in many more contexts. Now, this promise that Christ picked up of being equal unto the angels is also found in the Old Testament. In Zechariah chapter 3, verse 7, you have a series of visions given to Zechariah in which the angels are everywhere in that visions. The man on the red horse, the angels going forth to walk to and fro through the earth, the angel standing by Joshua, the high priest, the angel coming to Zerubbabel. Angels everywhere around the time of Zechariah chapter 3. And it says this, talking to Joshua, he says, "If you keep my charge, you shall judge my house and shall also keep my courts. And I will give you a right of access," is the Hebrew word. "I'll give you a right of access to walk amongst these that stand by." And the chapter opens with, "I saw Yahweh standing by. And he said to those that stood by, take away the filthy garments." And part of the promise to Joshua was a right of access to amongst those who stand by. And that is the equality with the angels that Jesus talks about, taking over their role in the administration of the world and acting in the same relationship to God as they do now. So a right of access amongst those who stand by. So the Old Testament had it there as well. A unified family in purpose and physicality. So let's examine what we know about our immortal nature via the angels. As we said the other day, our resurrected bodies will be perfected and restored. Now, at the time of resurrection, we're still mortal, free at that point of decrepitude and dementia and all the things that might have afflicted us, but nevertheless still mortal. But we have to be changed in a twinkling of an eye and changed to be immortal bodies. Our bodies perfected and restored. And it says God will beautify the meek with salvation. Still individually recognisable. You know, when the angels came to visit Abraham and Lot, they weren't clones. They weren't all exactly like replicas of each other. They looked like three ordinary beings. There was certainly something about their attitude and presence and words that made them different, but they looked like three individuals. Otherwise, it would have been an immediate recognition that this was something unusual. So individually recognisable, but certainly no longer aged or infirm. Our male and female, I believe, will be retained, but if you want to discuss that with me at some length, I'm happy to do that. But I believe that male and female identity will be retained. Our experience and our learning is retained. So everything we did learn in this life, and all the things reinforced by the judgment process, the good things that have been cemented, the things that we now learnt at last that we should have learnt earlier, all of that having been put in place will be retained. So we're not going to be devoid of our past experience. The angel said that the man has become as us, to know by experience good and evil. They'd been through that process. We're going to have that memory that we might go to the populations of the world and say, look, if God could save me, he can save you. So that learning and experience is retained and greatly expanded. And we're going to have the totally balanced and mature character of the Father. Though God reveals himself in male terms in the scriptures, God is not limited to purely male characteristics as we in our lives are, where males and females have different brains that work on different things, as Brother Steve said. Men have got that nothing box in the head, which women don't have. A man can go fishing and sit on a boat for 5 hours and stare at the water. It's just so different. We're made differently. But we're going to have the totally balanced and mature character of the Father. No longer prone to sin and temptation. And that's the one which we all want so much, isn't it? Never having to go down and say, I've done it again, I've failed again. Always frustrated by the fact that we fall into the same temptations. We won't have that in our lives at all. And we'll be totally sustained by God's spirit powers. That's a wonderful summary, isn't it, of some of the things we can see. Now, one thing about the angels, which is quite remarkable, you never see an old-looking angel. Think about that. Now, Job said this, talking about the future. He says, God will deliver us from going down to the pit. I've found a ransom. His flesh shall be fresher than a child's. He shall return to the days of his youth. And Job was expressing what we all want, is that we're going to go back to a time when we won't be suffering decrepitude of age. Psalm 103, satisfy thy mouth with good things, so that thy youth is renewed like the eagles. And we're going to see an eagle in a moment in Isaiah 40. But thy youth is renewed, and that's the promise that comes through. There's going to be eternal youthfulness. When the women looked into the sepulchre, they saw a young man sitting in the tomb. That was one of the archangels. A young man sitting in the tomb. So here is one of the most senior of the angels when it comes to authority, appearing to the women as a young man. And you think about that, isn't it? Isn't that so appropriate? You see, we're not going to be showing the signs of ageing in immortality. Whatever point God chooses to make us and to preserve our identity, it's going to be the time when we're at our peak and the best we could be, and all the blemish is gone. As I kept saying to you the other day, get out your grandparents' wedding photographs and just see what it was like 60, 70, 80 years ago when they were in the prime of life. But when you add to that the divinity that God's going to bring upon us by sharing his spirit nature, then we can see how we can be always young. And that's how the angels always seem to appear. Now, our minds have to be expanded as well. In the book of Samuel, you find two occasions where the angel's wisdom was referred to by way of metaphor, as an angel according to the wisdom of an angel of God. And it was a way that people described that an excess of knowledge and wisdom and understanding was to talk about as the angels are. And of course, as we said, in the Garden of Eden, the angels knew good and evil, and Eve saw that. So that when the serpent said, you eat that tree, you could be as smart as them. It was something to be desired to make one wise. And Eve perceived that they were far wiser than she was. They had a lot of depth about what they said. They had far greater knowledge about what God was doing. And so she envied that. And that was part of the temptation. She wanted to be as wise as the angels. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be wise, but you can't do it by disobeying the law of God. But you see, there was a wisdom about those angels that was observed by Eve. Let's go on to another topic. The brilliance of the immortal body. Apart from the transfiguration, no one ever saw Christ in his brilliance after he was raised. We certainly will when he comes in the throne of his glory, and we'll see the presence of his glory. But the transfiguration gave us an indication and gave him a vision of what immortal life would be like. And he shone like lightning, and the disciples fell asleep in the presence of that glory. And when the angel came from heaven to open the tomb, he sat upon that stone, having rolled it back, and his countenance was like lightning, and the keepers became dead men. They were completely traumatized and made unconscious by the very glory of that angel that sat upon that stone. You see, that's how an angel normally appears, when their glory is not restrained or restricted to the eyes of men. They don't have dimmer switches. They can be seen as they wish to be seen. So this angel wanted to make those keepers ineffective. And so he did, by showing the glory of his normal existence. When you read in the book of Acts, the angel of the Lord came upon them, and the glory of the Lord, Luke chapter 2, this is the shepherds in the field. All of a sudden, there they are in the dark out in the night with their sheep around their feet on the hills of Bethlehem. And all of a sudden, boom, an angel appears, and the whole panorama around Bethlehem is lit up. Incredible scene. They were sore afraid. And of course, in the case of Peter in the prison, when the angel came in, the whole prison is filled with light in the middle of the night. You see, that's the presence and the brilliance normal to a majestic, immortal body. Now, I want you to come to Exodus 24. We have a brilliant example of this in Exodus 24, when Moses and the 70 elders and Nadab and Abihu, which is why later on God slew them on the spot. You think what these two boys had seen, Aaron's sons. They were privileged to go up with the 70 elders, Moses and Aaron's sons. We read that in verse 9. They went up, Moses, Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 elders of Israel, and they saw the Elohim of Israel. Now we know they didn't see the Father. They saw the Elohim of Israel. They saw the Yahweh angel. And there was under his feet, and look at this, as it were a paved work of sapphire stone. And here he is in his majestic glory on the rough mountain of Sinai, or Horeb, wherever it was. And on that rough mountain, wherever he walked, under his feet it became flat like a paved area. And that's what the Spirit of God does. It brings the mountains down and it brings the valleys up and it levels everything out. It's a levelling influence. Wherever he walked, there was a paving under his feet, but it was clear and it was transparent. And it was blue. It was a sapphire colour, bright blue. And you could see right down into the depths of the mountain, because that's what the glory of God did to that mountain under the feet of that angel. Clear as the body of heaven. Is it any wonder that to commemorate this occasion, that God said in the book of Numbers, I want every Israelite to walk around inside a ribbon of blue, because you are imitating the Yahweh angel that was seen on Mount Horeb. I want you to walk inside a ribbon of blue, that you might remember to think on heavenly things and to realise you're walking in the presence of God. And that's why God had absolutely no time for Nadab and Abihu. They had seen this, and they got drunk and defiled the ceremony of the priest being ordained. But you see, what a glorious sight this was, that they should have this vision of the Elohim. Look what it says. And upon the nobles of the children of Israel, he laid not his hand. That he is the Yahweh angel. That's the he that you find in Genesis 18. Remember when they came to Abraham and Sarah? And the men said, where is thy wife? And he said, and it changes from the men talking to him talking, I will return unto thee. And that's the Yahweh angel. When Lot was brought out of Sodom with he and his wife and his two daughters, one in each hand, as the angels brought them out, it says they brought them out, and he said, because when they got outside the city, they met the Yahweh angel, the one who could decide whether or not Zoar would be spared. And when Lot pleaded that he might go into Zoar and not up the mountain, he said, I've accepted that. He had the power to make those decisions. He's the same angel that negotiated with Abraham. When they brought them out, he said, because he's waiting for them there. And you see, this is the Yahweh, this is God's personal representative. This is the one that goes into the tent of meeting with Moses, and they talk as a man talks to his friend. This is the one that buried Moses. he led not his hand, and they saw Elohim and did eat and to drink. And I believe there were many other Elohim probably there as well, but he was the outstanding figure amongst them. What an amazing thing it was. And in verse 17, looking from those down below, looking up at what was going up on that mountain, and the sight of the glory of Yahweh was like a devouring fire on the top of the mountain in the eyes of the children of Israel. They're looking up there and they can see this burning fire and flame around that mountain. It was an amazing thing, wasn't it, to have this angel come onto the earth with all his glory apparent. But it didn't hurt people. Upon them he laid not his hand. He made sure they were not adversely impacted by his glory, as the men at the tomb were. You see, it was a protection provided for them from that glory. What a wonderful thing it was that this angelic being. Now, when Moses went to meet with him, Moses would go up and to talk with this angel face to face and to receive the commandments and the law. It says, and Yahweh descended in a cloud and stood with him there. This is the occasion Moses asked to show me your glory. I want to see it, he said. I want to see your glory. And the angel said, look, you actually could not, if I revealed my full glory, you wouldn't survive. So go into the cleft of the rock and I will pass by and just let you see the back part as I go past of my physical glory. But Moses, that's not the most important thing about me. The most important thing is my character. And he proclaimed the glory of God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering, abundant in goodness of truth. That was the real glory of God. But there was a physical magnificence about that angel. And when Moses came down, the Israelites all backed away. And he said, what's wrong? Well, Moses, you're irradiated. You know, we know about nuclear irradiation, don't we? And people get sick or they get burnt. But Moses' face was shining, reflecting the glory of the angel he'd been talking to. And they saw the face and his face shone. He had to put a veil on his face so that they could tolerate his presence. So there was a reciprocation, there was a passing on of the physical glory of that angel. And you get some idea, don't you, of what it's like when an angel fully reveals themselves, that the glory was still shining out of Moses' face when he came down from the mountain. But they don't always appear like that. That's when they choose to show their glory openly. Sometimes angels want to appear in certain ways. Look at the instances of angels coming with fire. Now, I don't think the cherubim is a creature we're going to meet one day. The cherubim was an angelic appearance in a certain way. So the man and the woman saw an angel, but they saw the angel with 4 faces. That's not literal that he had 4 faces, but they saw 4 faces and they saw a fiery sword. There are no sword racks in heaven. There are no chariot stables in heaven. Angels can be seen as they wish to be seen. So in the cherubim, there was the cherubic faces were the way they wanted to be seen. Chariots of fire round about Elisha. The angel in the fire of sacrifice in the case of Samson's parents. The angel in the burning bush in the case of Moses. Moses goes up to this bush that's burning but not getting consumed. And the angel's in the bush and speaks out of the fire. You see, they can appear whichever way they wish to be seen. And that's why we have seraphim. When God wants to bring judgments, then seraphim are part of the symbology to show you this is a fiery judgment that will come, as you see in Isaiah chapter 6, who maketh his servants spirits, his servants a flaming fire. So they can be revealed in a very destructive, or in the case of the burning bush, a preservative fire. But they can appear as they wish to be seen. Sometimes you see angels with swords drawn. The fiery sword of Genesis 3, Joshua and the angel before Jericho, sword drawn. He judged Balaam, sword drawn. And the angel that stood over Jerusalem with a sword drawn. What's God telling you when you see an angel with a sword? Judgment is imminent. And that's what the angel with the sword was portraying. So angels don't literally carry around swords, but that's the way they wanted to be seen by men. A specific manifestation, because there was a message in the way that they appear. They affect human sight that they might reveal lessons. And that's what the angels do by appearing in different ways. So why aren't angels visible all the time? Well, it's the way that the human eyes are affected by God. Now, we firmly believe that God sends forth his angels to be with us. Jacob was shown that there was a staircase between heaven and earth, and the angels were ascending and descending. So going from earth to talk to God, beholding the face of the Father, as Jesus said, and then coming back to the little ones on the earth to be with us. And in Jacob's dream, the angel stood by him. And they go up and they come down, and most of their work is here on earth. But we don't see them unless they appear to us unknowingly. Some, said Paul, have entertained angels unaware. And it's not impossible that we in our life might have actually met, even had a discussion with an angel that we didn't realise was an angel. I'll let you think about that one. Paul said that can happen in New Testament times. You never know. You just don't know. But how is it that the chariots of fire that were all around the city of Dothan, all over the mountains around that city, how couldn't the young man not see them when Elisha could? What was the difference? Open his eyes. You see, that's how it works, isn't it? It's not that they aren't present. It's not that we're permitted to see them most of the time. Now, angels can be seen as they wish to be seen and be perceived by men. So some angels appear very threatening, other angels appear very gracious and very kind. Sometimes they're like ordinary humans. As I said, if Abraham had 3 clones, he would have been very suspicious. But they look like 3 individual people. He took them for normal visitors for a while, until they started to talk. Lot didn't realise anything different much, other than they looked like perhaps very noble visitors. He didn't perceive they were angels until they blinded the men outside the door. Sometimes they only reveal part of their body, and I'll come to that in a moment. Sometimes they appear in glory, in a way that projects their purpose. So that's just a summary of the ability of the angels in the way they control our eyes. Now look how this works. I want you to come to Luke chapter 24. Now, I would really recommend to you that if you ever get to talk to Jehovah's Witnesses, that you take them to 2 chapters, Luke 24, and you take them to Numbers 22, which we'll go to in a moment. And the reason for that is that Jehovah's Witnesses have this doctrine of invisibility. You know, the kingdom will be an invisible reign. It's back, we've had the kingdom, they said, since 1914. It's just an invisible reign that's been happening since 1914. Not much of a kingdom, might I add. However, it's invisible. You know why they have an invisible kingdom? You know why they have Jesus Christ with no body? You know, they believe Jesus does not have a physical body anymore. Because their atonement doctrine is the ransom is the price of his body. It's a complete ransom. The world, they believe, was ransomed by Jesus Christ giving up a physical body. And you say, what happened to the body? And they'll say, well, maybe it's preserved somewhere as a grand memorial of the love of God. But they can't prove it. They have to assume that God's preserved it somewhere. But his body was the price. So Jesus cannot have a body. But you say, but what about the body he appeared to the disciples with? It was a materialised body, they say. He could just materialise it when he wanted it. No reference in Scripture ever says that. But when you come to Luke, this is how you've got to explain it to them in Luke 24. The road to Emmaus. And as I said, here they are on the road to Emmaus, and they did not recognise him. They went with them. He walks alongside of them. It's a good 7 miles from Jerusalem to Emmaus. And, that would take you probably, when you're chatting and talking, it might take you 3 or 4 hours to do that. But anyway, they got there near dusk. And all the way, their eyes were holden that they should not know him. These were disciples. This was Mary, the wife of Cleopas. She had been at the foot of the cross. And she's going home with her husband. And they're on the way to Emmaus, and they invite him into their house to have a meal. And their eyes were holden, they should not know him. He did not want them to be so overjoyed that he was alive that they wouldn't listen to what he had to say as he unfolded the scriptures concerning himself. And so he gave them a wonderful exposition all the way, unfolding Moses and the prophets. And their minds were filled with the things that before they got into that joy of seeing he was alive. And it's only when he handed across the bread and they saw the hand that they recognised him. And that was the point at which, don't worry about it, Paul, don't worry about it. We can do it here. So that was the point at which they recognised him. So you see, here it was, and it tells us the difference. Verse 30, came to pass as he sat at meat, he took bread and blessed it and brake it. Starting to ring bells, isn't it, for them? And their eyes were opened and they knew him. And you can imagine, can't you, them having heard from the other disciples what Jesus did at the Last Supper. He takes the bread, he gives thanks over it, and then he breaks it. Take, eat. Bingo! Their eyes were open. And that was the point. Their eyes were opened, and it says he vanished out of their sight. Look at your margin, look at your Oxford margin, Scott. He ceased to be seen of them. He no longer allowed them to see. He shut them out so they could not observe his physical presence. And he goes straight back to Jerusalem to talk to the other disciples. The beautiful thing about this is he's just found the last of the faithful women that followed. Every other appearance to this point had been to the faithful women and not the disciples. After this, he meets Peter. Sometime he meets James. And then he meets the 12 or the 11 or the 10 and then the 11. But all the first appearances were to reward the faithful women. And Mary, his auntie, the wife of Cleopas, was one of those. So that's how it's done. Now look at the instance of Balaam. There we are, he vanished out of their sight, ceased to be seen of them. When you come to Balaam, you have the same thing. You see, Balaam couldn't see the angel. 3 times the ass tried to get out of the way of a threatening angel. And as I say, if you ever talk to Jehovah's Witnesses about invisibility, take them back here because they haven't got a clue about Balaam. No idea at all. And you say to them, was the angel there? And they say, well, yes, because the ass... But could Balaam see it? Why couldn't Balaam see it? And they got no answer. And it's very clear that eventually Yahweh opens the eyes of Balaam and he sees what the ass has been seeing all along. So the angel is physically there but not allowed to see it, and that's how it works. You see, we need to have those verses at hand when we're talking to people who make abominations of the scripture. He opened his eyes, and it's the same with Elisha. Open his eyes that he might see what I can see, said Elisha. And that's how it's done. That's how people suddenly change appearance. It says in Mark that Jesus walked the 2 disciples and he appeared in a different form. Well, of course he did. That's how they saw him. It doesn't mean Jesus was physically changed. It was when their eyes were affected to see what God wanted them to see. And that's how it works. And the same with the young man at Dothan. Well, let's move on to the fact that angels sometimes have significant departures. Now, normally, most occasions angels occur, they just disappear off the scene and you don't see them anymore. But sometimes they want to be seen to be leaving because it's a closure of the incident. So in Numbers 12, when you've got Miriam and Aaron being chastened for their jealousy against Moses, the anger of Yahweh was kindled against him and he departed. And he made a present of turning his back on Aaron and Miriam. Having stricken her with leprosy, he turns around and he leaves them and they see him going. You see, there was a point in them seeing that. When Abraham, in Genesis 17, the covenant of circumcision has been delivered, he left off talking with him, and God went up from Abraham, and he actually saw the angel going back to heaven. In the shepherds, they saw the angels not just leaving, they heard them singing all the way. You think about that. Here was a tremendous host of angels singing their hearts out over the birth of Jesus. They've been working on it for 500 years, and now it's happened. And it came to pass, and you can imagine, having sung the initial songs that they heard, the heavenly choir just gradually receded into the distance, singing and singing and singing. What a memory for those shepherds. Later on, when Philip has to be taken from one place to another, the angel picks him up. It calls him the Spirit, and we know it's the angel. He caught away Philip. He just removed him to another place. And that's a great cross-reference to the first of Thessalonians, who talks about being snatched away, not caught up to heaven, but caught away, just removed to another place. Samson's parents, the angel goes up in the flame of fire. The association of the angel with the fire was what they needed to learn. And Judges 6 with Gideon, the angel departed out of his sight. How did the angel come? Here's Gideon down in the wine press, threshing away, any Midianites coming? No, he went more threshing. Next time he looks up, there's an angel sitting under a tree. Very rarely in the Bible do angels sit. They sit in the tomb of Christ because the whole phase of their work is now completed. And they sat with Gideon. Here's a man that's terrified by the Midianites. And the angel just sits under a tree and says, "How's it going, Gideon?" You see, he was trying to show him something by the fact that he sat there. But later on, he departs from Gideon. So Gideon knows that this is not just a vision. This was a visitation. He saw it start and he sees it end. So there's purpose and closure in the fact that they move at certain times in certain ways. Now, this ability to make us see what they want us to see comes also with the fact that we only see parts of the angels at times. Jeremiah's commission. Yahweh put forth his hand and touched my mouth. Now, you can talk to Brother David Emerson, but we have a great love for the book of Jeremiah between us. And, was the Yahweh angel actually there? But there was certainly a hand that touched Jeremiah's lips. And the same for Ezekiel. There was a hand that touched his lips. This is not a vision. This is a physical experience. He put forth the form of a hand in Ezekiel 8 verse 3. You know the one about the writing on the wall in the case of Daniel chapter 5. The king saw the hand that wrote on the wall, just the hand. Was it a disembodied hand? Of course it wasn't. But if an angel had appeared, that would have caught the attention and not the writing. But a hand wrote, showing it was a divine message. But if an angel was there, they would be worrying, who's that guy? And Daniel said, a hand touched me and brought me upon my knees. So you see, there are occasions when the hand is extended to touch people, and sometimes the hand just appears on its own. And that's one of the capabilities, when you can control what you people see of you. And that's what angels do. Let's talk now about unlimited mobility. And the verse, of course, that we all know about this is, God gives power to the faint, and them that have no might, he increases strength. Even youths shall be faint and be weary, which is the hope of all hosts at youth conferences. And the young men shall utterly fail. But look at the promise. They that wait upon Yahweh shall renew their strength. It means change their strength. No longer fed by food and blood and oxygen. Totally different source coming from the Spirit of God. And they won't have wings like the churches portray angels. They shall have the ability to soar effortlessly. You just watch an eagle. Once it gets into that air current, it'll soar for miles. No flapping like a duck taking off in the water. No paddling, just completely floating effortlessly. And that's the figure of the eagle we're given. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. This is Rotherham's translation. They that wait upon Yahweh shall renew their strength. They shall mount on strong pinion like eagles. So those wings, they just completely just adjust it this way and that, and they can go wherever they want to go. We're not going to have wings, but the ability to soar through the heavens and travel over great spaces will be ours. They shall run and not grow weary. They shall walk and not faint. I want you to come to Isaiah chapter 60. I want to show you ourselves doing that. You know, part of that promise in Isaiah 40 is the fact that there will be no lack of energy, no need of sleep. If we share the nature of God who slumbers not nor sleeps, then we shall run and not be weary, we shall walk and not faint. We're never going to need to go to bed and have rest. But when it comes to mobility, look at this. Isaiah 60 is a chapter that describes the pilgrimage of the world to Zion. And so you read, and you want to just colour in these, we haven't got them coloured in, just colour in the word come or come together. Verse 3, Gentiles shall come to thy light, O Zion, kings of the brightness of thy rising. And the picture is all these people coming from all over the world in pilgrimage to Zion to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. They shall gather themselves together. They shall come unto thee in verse 4. They shall come from far. In verse 5, they shall flow together like a great stream coming up. In verse 6, they shall cover thee. And here are the Arab nations coming, the sons of Keturah from Midian and Ephah and Sheba and Dedan. In verse 7, the flocks of Kedar, the sons of Ishmael come as well. Isn't that going to be a transformation? You know, when you see the streets of Gaza and Tehran and Yemen with everybody screaming for the blood of Israel, hating Israel, this tells us that all of those nations are going to come to Jerusalem with great humility that they were wrong. And they shall come to the King of Israel. They shall come up. Again in verse 7, they shall be gathered together. They shall come with acceptance upon mine altar. And here are all the mortal population streaming to Zion to make their sacrifices. But as they get near to the temple, there's something flying over their head. Now, if we are in those areas and bringing those people up to Zion, wherever in the world we're assigned to try and bring the mortal population to God, and we bring them to the Feast of Tabernacles in Zion, when they're on the path and inside the land, we fly ahead to the homing instinct to be with Christ, the other saints and the angels. Look at verse 8. Who are these that fly as doves to their windows? Who are these that fly as doves to their windows? You know, the mortals say this, oh, look at all this, look at that going over the top of us. There are people who are white like doves, who have a homing instinct for the courts of their God. And they're flying ahead to the dovecotes where they really belong, the inner circle of the temple of Ezekiel's prophecy. You see, angels can travel like that. They can stand between heaven and earth. They can pick up people and move them when they want to move them. But there's the picture of us, desperate to be in the presence of Christ. And we fly ahead as doves to their windows. It's a beautiful thought, isn't it, to see it that way. Now, angels did appear to men and were seen as ordinary individuals. 3 men stood by them. He knew there was something different about them, but in typical hospitality, he made them welcome. The same with Lot. You know, come and stay, wash your feet. Lot didn't see anything particularly different when they came to him in Genesis 19. And that's why Paul says to us, don't be forgetful to entertain strangers. In other words, don't pass opportunities to get people you don't know, because you never know what they might be bringing to your life. In the past, people entertained angels unawares. And so Abraham entertained those angels and looked after them and fed them. And they very patiently waited for bread to be baked, for a calf to be trimmed, You know, you think of some here might have ever slaughtered an animal. That's not a slow process, is it? It's just a slow process. You know, to get an animal ready for cooking, and then you've got to cook it. They waited for probably several hours for that meal to come. And there it was. And the angels were very patient, very gentle. And they were watching Abraham and Sarah working together. And they ate. And they ate the feast that Abraham gave them. Brother Robert says this in The Visible Hand of God. Angels can eat, though independent of eating for life. We won't need to eat, but we will be able to eat. When they eat, their food is assimilated to their spirit nature. So instead of digestion that we go through, the spirit burns it up. There is this difference. The angel nature is spiritual and incorruptible. And this is a great old English decent phrase where they were very careful what they said. None of the offensiveness, less incident with the process of animal organisations. We won't need a toilet block. All right. So digestion will be internal. None of the needs of digestion we normally have. Cleanness, holiness and corruptibility and the strength of characteristics of the spirit nature, involving completeness of absorption of all the substances partaken of. So the pleasure of eating and the pleasure of fellowship as we eat, the involvement with the sacrifices the mortals make, is part of our privilege of the kingdom. It's a wonderful thought, isn't it? Now, Brother Roberts remarked about the way that the angels treated Lot. The angels declined his invitation, remarking they would abide in the street all night. Curious visitors these, who could dispense with roof and a bed. Here is a peep, he says, into the modes of angel life. Angels are higher than man. They cannot die anymore. They can adapt themselves to any condition. Sleep they don't require. They can abide in the street all night without inconvenience. The fact is interesting to us because of the hope the gospel gives us of becoming like to them. And so we can see that these interactions between mortals and humans are how we're going to treat the mortals over which we are given to be priests. We have to have compassion on them. We have to treat them gently because they will be struggling with the limitations of a mortal mind. They'll be struggling with their temptations and their lack of understanding, as Lot was on this occasion, of what was really going on. And we'll have to deal with them gently and patiently. In the end, having given them a chance to preach to their children, they took them by the hand and said, "We have to go." That's gentleness, isn't it? They didn't drive them out with a whip and say, "Get out or else." They took them by the hand and led them out. And you see, this is the way the angels work, isn't it? Isn't it beautiful? And then we have the ability to read minds. This is one of the things which is most essential to our work in the kingdom. Zacharias. And the angel comes after 400 years of virtual silence and promises to him a child. And he doesn't believe. And the angel knows he doesn't believe. You're going to be dumb because you don't believe my words. He never said, "I don't believe you." The angel instantly knew inside of him there was a disbelief. Comparison to Mary, who instantly believed and asked about the method. But she believed it would happen. One way or another, she believed. She instantly believed. That was the difference with Mary. See, immortal can read people's minds. Abimelech, the case of Abimelech. The Elohim said to him in a dream, "I know what you did in taking that man's wife. You did in the innocence of your character, the integrity of your heart." And the angel knew that he would not curse Abimelech any more than he had to, because he did it because he'd heard a lie from Abraham. And you see, he knew that was a good man, and he spared him, but he could have easily killed him for touching Abraham's wife. So you see, they have that ability to read the minds of mortals. In the case of Sarah, why did Sarah laugh? She said, "I didn't laugh." Yes, you did. You see, there's no getting away from a person that knows what you're thinking, is there? Here's David scrabbling on the gates of Gath, pretending to be a lunatic. You can imagine, can't you? Well, like this on the gate, and all the time his brain's saying, "Save me, save me." And God heard that. And the angel came and delivered him from that. You see, that's how it works, isn't it? To read the minds of mortals. And we will need that. Jeremiah says to Israel, I'll give you shepherds according to my heart, who shall feed you with knowledge and understanding. That's the work of the saints, is to feed knowledge and understanding into people's hearts. Look at this. You won't be able to remove your teachers. They could put the prophets in prison. They could burn them and cut them in half and get rid of them. They didn't want to hear the word of God in the past. He says you won't be able to do that to these teachers. You won't remove them away. Your eyes will see them. But sometimes you won't see them. In your ears, you'll hear a word behind thee. And you can imagine, can't you, in the kingdom, some person thinks, oh, those saints have gone, that's good. I can just go and steal my neighbour's sheep. Oops, don't do it. I know what you're up to. I know what you're thinking. You'll hear a word behind you. Oops, here he's come back again. I thought he was gone. That's the way, walk in it. And you see, that's what we're going to need, that ability to read people's minds, aren't we, in the kingdom? And the angels had that, and we're going to have that, the power to actually read the minds of mortals. Let's talk about the language of angels. You know, we know in the kingdom, we're told there will be a new language for the whole earth. Whether it's a form of Hebrew, we're not really sure. I tend to think that God, if it's got to be done by a miracle. We're not going to spend the first 10 years teaching people a language. So maybe God can, like he tangled up the tongues at Babel, he can untangle them if he wants to, just like that. God can do that. Never ever limit what God can do. There's going to be a language of the kingdom that everybody might pray with the same language. You can imagine what it would be like if you had 100 different languages praying at the same time at the temple in different languages. It's not going to be like that. There will be a pure language. Maybe Paul heard that when he was taken up to the third heaven. Because he said one of the metaphors he used was, I can speak with all the languages of men, or even the languages of angels. That's a hyperbole. Even the language of angels. He knew the language of angels existed. Maybe that's the language of the future. So God can reverse Babel, and he will do that. And so we will have that language of the angels, which we will also share. All the spirit gifts. In the first century, because the Bible was not finished, because the perfection of understanding was not yet come, because even the atonement was not fully understood until Paul wrote about the declaration of God's righteousness, they needed the spirit gifts to help them with their preaching. Unlearned fishermen went out and turned the world upside down because the Spirit gave them utterance of things they had never sat down and learned from books. They needed that help from the Spirit. But in the ecclesias, apart from the apostles, individuals got one gift. And there was a distribution in ecclesias of the various gifts of the Spirit because it was a down payment. The apostle said, we have the first fruits of the Spirit. This is just a beginning of the great harvest of the Spirit that will come. He called it an earnest, a deposit of the Spirit in our hearts, a down payment. We used to have a thing called lay-by. Now you have all kinds of things where you buy first and pay later. But it used to be lay-by, where you went and you made a deposit and you paid a bit off each week till you got the item. And that's what the Spirit gift was. It was just a little taste of the kingdom. In Hebrews 6 it says you've got a taste of the heavenly powers. So the gifts they had in the first century were only until the Bible was completed, and they died out with the apostles because no one could pass them on but the apostles. But it was an earnest of the Spirit. When we get to the kingdom, we'll have all of those powers. Now, this is Hebrews 6, where people who had the gifts were now going back to the law of Moses. And Paul says, that's an unforgivable sin. You've seen the power that comes from the Lord Jesus Christ giving you the Spirit gift. You've had it in your own hands. And now you're going back to the law? You've tasted of the good word of God and the powers of the world to come. You've had that taste of what it's like to have the Spirit gifts. And we will have all the gifts, brethren and sisters, all the gifts, all the abilities of the Spirit, unlimited to us in the future. except perhaps for some of God's foreknowledge, which even the angels didn't have. Maybe the only thing that will be limited is foreknowledge. You know why God won't give us foreknowledge? Because he wants to keep making the kingdom exciting as new things unfold and unfold and unfold. And God will make the kingdom more and more exciting by not revealing every detail to us at the start. Immense power to perform any miracle we want, to heal people, to heal diseases, to heal wounds, to create food when it's needed. But God only gives that power to characters fit to use it. Brother Roberts said this, though power greater than dynamite. Now, Brother Roberts was fascinated because dynamite had just been invented. We'd probably say nuclear missile. Though power greater than dynamite lies latent in the graceful and brilliant form of an angel, it's under the control of a perfect and beneficent intelligence. And that's going to be us in the kingdom, a perfect and beneficent intelligence. Talking about the way they treated Lot, the angels are not indifferent to the wishes of others. They are the true gentlemen of the universe. They reflect the character of the eternal Father, who is gracious, compassionate and good. And the combination that power is given to those who are naturally humble and kind and gentle is the way that power should be distributed. Today, power is given to brutal creatures like Donald Trump and Ayatollahs, and they'd use it wrongly. Not so with the saints. They're humble creatures. I love this passage in Revelation 22. John's overwhelmed by all that's been revealed to him in the apocalypse. Falls at the angel's feet. The angel picks him up and said, John, don't do that. I'm just one of the fellow servants. This is a mighty angel. This is the angel of Jesus Christ, sent down to give the revelation. I'm just a fellow servant to you, John. And here's that lovely little phrase again, and the prophets. Everything you ever read about angels, they love the prophets, because the prophets stood up for the word of God when everybody else was against them. And they said what God wanted to be said, though it cost them dearly. And that's a lesson for us to learn. God loves faithful prophets that say, this is what God says, and take the consequences. That angel had a great memory of people like Daniel, a man greatly beloved. I'm a fellow servant to you and the prophets, and of the rest of those that keep the sayings of this book. There's always that little division in Revelation between the prophets and the others. They're a very special category in God's mind. You see, there's a humility about the angels. Look at the concern. You know, when the angel came to Zacharias, the first thing he said was, fear not. And the same to Mary, fear not. They're conscious of the fact that their appearance is going to be troubling to a mortal. They accept hospitality. They're firm with Lot. They agree to his plea for Zoar to be saved. You know, when the destruction came, the city of Zoar was spared. Did Lot stay in Zoar? No, he's up the mountain as fast as he can go. But he was given the opportunity to have what he wanted because he was fearful and unsure what's going on. And they have a great affection for the godly. They saw Daniel as a man greatly beloved. Who else at that time in the world could they look to? The nation's gone. The exiles in Babylon, many of them were still keeping the old ways and the old things that Ezekiel had to condemn over and over. They weren't listening to Ezekiel either. But there was a man called Daniel, and the angels loved him because he stood for everything that God stood for. They care for other people. Look at the ministration to Hagar. In the wilderness, an angel found her, provided for her, and reassured her. Brother Roberts, commenting upon the angels with Lot, how useful is the picture of Abraham's discussion with Elohim when Abraham pleaded for Lot. The grace and condescension of the angels. The angel knew there was not 10 in Sodom. He didn't slam Abraham to the ground and say, you're wasting your time, Abraham. He let Abraham plead. And every time he exceeded, until he got down to 10. He knew there was less than 10. He also knew Sodom had to be destroyed. So harmless and sociable with Abraham, but to the enemy of his gods, better than that dynamite torpedo. as the Sodomites experienced. The reflection of this is of value of the prospect exhibited in the gospel that one day, and not long a distant one, becoming acquainted with myriads of them, sharing the wonderful exaltation which they enjoy as the immortal and powerful servants of Yahweh. You know, Brother Roberts had a glorious vision of the angels. When I went to the office in Birmingham and Michael Ashton brought out the Bible of Robert Roberts, I put it on the desk and opened it like that, and there was a whole 2-page Bible insert on the angels. It gave me a great thrill. They are happy to serve. They are servants, as Jacob learnt, that they came down to earth to be with him. They ministered the heirs of salvation. Look at Elijah. 6 weeks it took him to get to Horeb because he was totally and utterly depressed. Couldn't eat, sleeping all the time. Every time he woke up, gentle hand touched him, woke him up. You need to eat. You go back to sleep with his depression. But the angel was cooking for 6 weeks. He didn't just eat once. He went in the strength of that meat for a whole 6 weeks as the angel looked after him and cared for him in his time of great depression. And didn't Jesus teach us about service when he washed his disciples' feet? Knowing that he came from God, knowing he was going to God, he converted himself to be a servant. And he gave us the lesson, didn't he, that we have to learn that service is the greatest reward in this life and will ensure the life to come. It's more blessed to give than to receive, to be a servant. You've got to wash each other's feet, not literally, but in whatever way we can to increase the faith of our brethren and sisters, we do it. If angels are dedicated to service, care and fostering spiritual growth, you know, they're all about sealing the saints of God in their forehead. So should we be. We're in training for eternal service and undertaking the sealing of the minds of the mortals with divine thinking. We're getting ready for that now. So let's summarise what we've seen about the angels. This is just a quick summary. Perfected, beautified bodies, eternal youthfulness, radiant brilliance, celestial bodies, like Jesus' glorious body. No longer able to die, not feeling pain or knowing decay. No proneness to sin, a spirit-filled mind. Powers of intellect, vast wisdom, quick understanding in the ways of God. All the powers of the Spirit to read their minds. A degree of foreknowledge. Power to heal and perform miracles. Controlling the forces of nature. Affecting the eyes of beholders. Untrained ability to render praise with perfect tone and unison. You probably know, don't you, in Ezekiel 40 and verse 44, the chamber of the singers is what Ezekiel portrays. That the joy of the saints singing with Christ. Joyful worship down through the 1,000 years. Able to travel swiftly. Not needing sleep. Eating for fellowship. Fellowship with fellow heirs. Getting to know the angels. Respected by the mortals. And knowing Christ personally. And finally, eventually, seeing the face of the Father. It's a glorious hope, brethren and sisters. I want to leave you the last words of Brother Thomas. The last thing he ever wrote. In a little book that he was preparing called What is Flesh? He was writing to a brother, and under the heading of What is Flesh? After a few lucid paragraphs, he insisted the will of eternal was the true basis of distinction between man and the inferior creation. He came to speak of the change of nature, which the friends of God will be at length subjected to by Christ. And these are the last words Brother Thomas ever wrote before he died. The transforming energy of divine power will convert spirit that passes away into spirit that passes not away. They who may be the subjects of this operation will be exalted to equality with the angels, whose substance doth not waste nor pass away.